Today we're going to be working on a CSS framework called boxes.css. We're mostly going to be doing some brainstorming today. I don't think we're going to be building it quite yet because there's still some major decisions that need to be made. And also, my baby is napping and I am here. Hey, Ice Wizards and Shashamism. Sashamism. Welcome to the stream. So my baby's napping and he might wake up anytime, and I'm the only one here. So if that happens, the stream's gonna end and I'm gonna go take care of him. However, this is usually his longest nap time. He's been sleeping for an hour and a half to 2 hours lately, um, at this time, and he's like, I'm like watching the camera. He's like moving a little bit. Um, so yeah, hopefully he stays down for like an hour at least. Okay, so let's get into it. So I did some brainstorming on this together. Sorry, we did some brainstorming on this together yesterday during the live stream. We came up with a whole list of rules, but there were still some things we had to work through, some problems. So let's go through them one by one and what my thinking on them is right now. Okay, so first, our idea is that so at the top we're gonna have like a logo and some nav buttons, some nav links, right? And what I'm thinking is that these could all have padding around them, and the width of each box will be determined by the content inside of it. Sounds natural enough, right? I mean, that's how most websites are designed. Um, the yeah, so let's actually say that. I don't know. We don't really need to say that. Um, yeah, we'll say that actually. The the in most frameworks, we'll say CSS frameworks, the like width of components is determined by the content. Let's zoom in a little bit so people can read this. Um, by the content in this framework, um, the size of the component, let's just say the size of the component is determined by the content. In this framework, the size is predetermined and the content needs to be made to fit. I don't know why text feels so janky on Windows, but it does. On a Mac, text feels great. Windows, every time I type in here, I feel like the entire text box is like shaking, like everything's re-rendering. It's really weird. Okay, yeah, but we do have this this example where the width of each item is determined by the content, right? At least so far. And then we have this area um, where we might also have the same thing. Now, I'm going to kind of take everyone through what I'm thinking about this problem. So this problem is a problem area because so you have the header text, the subheading text, the email address, and the sign up button. That all works. That's all totally 100% fine. This looks beautiful. This is going to work really, really well as long as we have good typography. This left-hand section is going to be beautiful. The problem is this right-hand section. What happens um, if, let's say, we have a video, right? So let's um, resize this so we have a video in here, right? If we have a video, this looks great, right? This is about the aspect ratio of a video. And so a video is going to fit perfect in here. We could even make that video full height and full width, and it will just look gorgeous, right? No, wrong. Because this content on the left-hand side is completely variable, right? This content, this subheading could be this long, right? Or it could be 3 lines long, right? There's no controlling it. We haven't put in any limitations on this left-hand side. So whatever the user wants to do, as far as adding text or removing text, they can do. And it's well within their rights. We're not going to have anything in the framework to stop them from doing that. It doesn't make sense. But even if we said, okay, your text has to fit inside of the, the box that we gave you so that we can have this aspect ratio for the video, it still wouldn't work. Why? Because when this content resizes, everything's going to reflow. And when it reflows, you're going to have to expand the height of this, to make everything fit. And then the aspect ratio just doesn't match for the video, right? You're not going to have a video that's going to look good at 16 by 9 and then look at just as good when it's a tall rectangle, right? That just doesn't make sense. So the problem we're trying to deal with is maintaining the aspect ratio, and the idea that I came up with was having everything be boxes. Now, I'm not sure if boxes are the exact right approach, but let's pretend they are for now, right? We're going to just have squares, right? Square boxes. Then what does this look like in that circumstance, right? Just humor me for a second. So in that circumstance, we're going to ungroup this, and we're going to have a large square, right? So let's move this to the side. And let's just approximate a square. We don't have to have like an exact square here. Because, we're playing around here, right? And then this rectangle would be about half of its height. So this is a height of, let's say, 960, so it's going to be 480 height. And we'll make it a tiny bit shorter just so we can have 2 in here. Okay, and there's a little space in between now. Okay, so now we have the square. We have these 2 rectangles. Now this top rectangle is really just 2 squares, right? I mean, if we copy that and move this to the side, what we really have is just 2 squares, and they're just joined together, right? And then we have this content in there. That's going to fit nicely in there. It's not maybe going to be as tight, nestled in there as we had with our rectangle that could have, unlimited height and width depending on the content, but it's good enough, right? We have the 2 squares next to each other and we've joined them, and then we put the text in. Ice Wizards, welcome to the stream. Thank you so much for stopping by. So then we have this bottom section, and we have the 2 squares next to each other. And this is something I struggle with a little bit. So let's say we have 1 square over here and another square. Actually, let's just copy. Let's just copy this square, right? Okay, perfect. And we can even expand this a little bit. We'll just do 1 and then 1 and move this back. Okay. So let's pretend these are 2 squares next to each other because they pretty much are. Now, how do we fit the email address and sign up in there? We can't really, right? I mean, like, let's try, right? So we'll ungroup all of these things. We could, for example, have this be one big button, which doesn't make sense. And have a huge square button, right? That doesn't make sense. Or, on the other hand, we could have like a huge square input area, which doesn't make sense either. So the other solution is that, and this I think is kind of a cool idea, is that we keep the square, right? So we don't even join this top area, right? We keep everything just one square. And then we have the email address input, and we have the sign up button. to the left. And so we can delete those containers. Let's just make sure this is centered, not that it matters. Yeah, I actually regret doing that now that I did it because it doesn't matter. Okay, so now we have some padding around the square. We have the header text, the subheader text, and the email address and sign up. Now we can just leave this here. And then maybe we, fill the rest of it with some kind of image or something, right? That's a possibility. The other possibility is that we center all of this. So we grab all of this and we center it inside of the square. This doesn't look bad either, and it will look particularly nice when it's next to a media object that is also a square, right? So if we have a media object that's also a square, and let's say this could, this could be a video that's a square. It could be an image that's a square. It could be an animation, or if we really wanted to, we could have a rectangle that just like resizes, right? So this could be a video that's vertically centered, just like this text is vertically centered, and it's going to look fine, right? So it doesn't have to take up the whole square, although it's nicer if it does take up the whole square. Um, okay, so that's kind of one, oops, brainstorm. And I think that works pretty well. I think that works pretty well. Now, the next question is, what about the nav links? If we have these kind of rectangles that expand to um, fit their content, don't we kind of ruin the entire, idea behind Remake? Or sorry, not Remake, but behind the CSS framework of just having squares. I think that might be true, but also, um, I don't know, we might want to have rectangles, but let's just say we don't want to have rectangles. We only want to have squares. Okay, let's see, just as a thought experiment, because all of this is really just a thought experiment at this point, anyways. Let's just say we need this navigation to be all squares. Would that be the worst thing, right? I don't think so. I don't think it would be the worst thing. I think we would have, a square that looks something like this, um, with the logo in it, and it would probably be an icon logo, right? We might have some text in a square next to it, I guess, but we would probably just have an icon logo with maybe like the name below it, right? So, but it would have to be in a square. Um, and then we would have these links, and these would also be squares. But the cool thing about this is that you wouldn't even need to know that they were squares as like a visitor. You wouldn't need to know because they're really just going to have text links inside of them, right? So like this is just sorry, um, this is just the layout, right? So if we have, let's say, um, let's decrease the, oh, actually, let's type something first. So let's say home, I don't know if we need home. We'll say like features, and let's decrease this font size so that it works with this. Um, yeah, let's actually go down to 22, and let's center this in here. So we could have features. Let's look at like another example of a landing page. What's like a nice landing page that's like a standard, SaaS application? Um, that's like a, I don't know, like a, I don't know. I'll go to Potion. Potion is a piece of software that I use. We have showcase, guides, templates, pricing, login, sign up. So let's just do that. We'll do showcase, um, and we'll center this in there. And then we have guides, templates, um, pricing, login, and sign up. Okay. Oops. Okay, so I wish I knew the shortcuts for centering stuff, but for now we'll just do it manually by clicking these buttons. Okay, so now we've centered everything. So this doesn't look terrible. Of course, it might be nicer if the text was all the same distance apart. Like here we have this is 83 apart, that's 83 apart, and then this is 110 apart, and then this is 107 apart. So it's inconsistent spacing. But let's remove all of this for a second. It doesn't look terrible, right? And most of your nav items are gonna have about the same amount of text, right? We're probably gonna have around 8 letters for every nav item. Maybe a little bit more sometimes, maybe a little bit less sometimes, right? But it's all gonna be around the same width. And so is having squares really the worst thing? I would argue, no, not really. It's not the worst thing. So let's pretend we've solved that problem and we are on the square train, right? So we have really committed ourselves to squares. Um, what do we do about this very common section of a heading that is introducing a heading that is introducing a new section? Now, one possibility is that we just get rid of it, right? And just this is just a thought experiment, so let's just be clear about that. Let's just say only squares thought experiment. Because we are not committing to this only squares, mantra. This is just a try at something, right? Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Okay, so let's go with this next section, which has the centered heading introducing a section. So yeah, so again, one possibility, and yeah, actually, let me just specify what the section might look like. So this section might look something like this, where we have uh, like a quarter width square next to another quarter width square next to another quarter width square next to another quarter width square. And let's just I don't know. I guess we don't have to pretend that they're all the same width. We can make them all the same width. And then can we space these? How do we space them? Should be spacing, horizontal spacing. Okay, so let's grab this, drag it to the end, and okay, perfect. Okay. Um, okay. So yeah, so it's introducing something like this, where we have these squares. And it's fine if these are if these are media or whatever, right? Um, we can support that. Um, or they can be text, right? They can have like headings and some description text. Or it could have like media and then it could have like text down here, right? So that would work too. This is kind of a nice layout and it's a pretty standard layout. I mean, you're not going to really see on a lot of sites like these exact squares. That's not something that really, is too common, but it's not like ugly, it doesn't, it's not like it doesn't make sense to have it. And if you do, um, work on your designs to make this work, it's gonna be beautiful. It's gonna work really well. Now the problem is this rectangle, right? We've made a lot of effort, right, to have our nav be only squares, to have this be only a square. We've got a rectangle in here, but this is just auto-centered, auto padding content, right? So it's not even like it matters that this is a rectangle. We're gonna have some rectangle looking things in the design. We made this media item a square, right? So let's make it clear that this is a media item. So we'll just say like this is an animation, and we'll just make that natural width and just center that in here. Okay. And now we have these media items down here, which might be like media and text next to each other, but we don't really know yet. And we have this centered heading that's introducing a section, and it is not a square. So one option is to make it a square. So, well, actually, sorry. One option, and this is actually one of the simpler options, and we copied this from here, so we don't need to preserve this. One option is to make it left aligned, right? I don't know why this feels like the simplest thing to me, but we could do something like this, where we left align this here, and then we make, I don't know. I don't know exactly what we would do with this, but we would make some indication that like this section is referring to this stuff down here. It doesn't feel great to me. I guess, we can add a media image here, and then it's a section, whatever. It kind of works. The other option, which I might like a little bit better, is if we did keep this centered, and then we centered the box, right? So let's group these boxes really quick so that we can center this in the middle of them. Um, so yeah, we could have this centered section here that is now, it's a square. It's a square. But it has a little bit too much padding on top and on bottom, and it doesn't feel super related to these elements down here, even if we, move them up so they're right next to it, right? It still doesn't feel like this is referring to these items. It feels a little bit too far away. This text does, right? So like let's just remove this background just so we can get a natural feeling for that. Yeah, this feels like its own thing in the middle of the page, and then these feel like the next thing. Okay, so next thing we could do to address this is to, instead of center aligning this, we could have the same padding, that we have around here, around this box, but we could just bottom align it, right? Now we have the problem that we have all this top area. What do we do with that? Well, we could add like, two boxes in there. I don't know what we do with them. I really don't. Um, but we could have them there, right? It feels a little weird. It feels a little forced to me. Um, but if we did have that, if we did have those two boxes in there, we could theoretically center this in the remaining space. Now this kind of gets away from our rule of only squares again, right? Because now we have this joined square here. These two joined squares. So now we're not only squares again. And why this attachment to only squares, even for this type of content? It's just to try to keep it simple, right? We just want to only be thinking about, ideally, if we could, and again, this is just a thought experiment, if all we had to think about was squares, it would be a beautiful, beautiful world. It really would be. Um, okay, so, yeah, that's pretty much all I've got for this. Um, there is one more idea, right? So the last idea is kind of, down the track of what I was doing before, right? Which is Okay, what if we have two squares that can be McIntyre 1994, thank you for joining the stream. I really appreciate you being here. Um, so yeah, so we could have two squares that are joined together, right? Now, before you get all up in arms on me and say, David, you promised we weren't going to have any rectangles. Um, let's think about this for a second, right? So, um, would this be that bad? Because the nice thing about this, and I'm not talking about from like I don't know, like a theoretical standpoint. From a theoretical standpoint, this sucks, right? We want only squares. We're very attached to only having squares. But from a practical standpoint, it's not that bad because we do have, okay, so first of all, um, let's move this over here because it's not referring to this. Okay, so first of all, we don't have any media that this is next to. So it doesn't matter that this is a rectangle, right? It really doesn't matter that it's a rectangle because we don't have any media to the left of it. Also, even if we did, right? So let's say we did have some media over here. Even though it's not a square, we still have an aspect ratio that will be maintained, right? We have the half a square height and the double and the full square width, right? Um, so we would still have that ratio. But in this circumstance, where it is in the center, it's also pretty easy to do the responsiveness, right? So if we do our um, responsive demo again, my baby is still asleep. This is wonderful. So if we do our responsive demo, let's forget about the nav just for now. What this is going to end up as at like a tablet width is this stacking on top of this, and then this stacking on top of this, right? And yeah, let's forget about these medium boxes because it's kind of obvious what happens to them, right? I mean, maybe not 100% obvious, but they're going to be able to handle themselves. Okay, so then what happens to this when it gets even smaller, when it gets to the mobile view? Well, it's the same thing that happens to this box, right? So every box is going to have like a default um, text size, for the different heading elements. And as the box gets smaller, right, because it's going to have to go down to mobile width, which we're going to say, is about half of what this was, right? So, it's around here, we'll say. Then this content is going to reflow, right? And it's going to get smaller. The heading is going to get a little bit smaller. All of the other elements are going to get a little bit smaller. And that's the exact same thing that can happen here, right? So if we group this, again, it's just going to get a little bit smaller and it's going to reflow. And it's all going to reflow ideally, right? So I haven't quite worked all of this out yet, but let's just pretend that it's worked out. Ideally, everything's going to fit in here. We're just going to delete this text for a second. Okay, so ideally, all of this content, the padding's going to get a little bit less. The text is going to get, quite a bit smaller. And then even probably these, inputs and buttons are going to get a little bit smaller so that everything still fits within that square, right? And if we do the same thing down here, let's say we go down to 40 and we go down to 32, right? So 40 and 32, and these aren't, exactly what we're looking for. But it's not going to be that bad, right? let's group this too and just resize this. So now we're gonna have a stack that looks like this. And we can delete this animation thing, whatever. So yeah, so then we're gonna have the header text, right? The nav's gonna reflow too, but we're not gonna focus on that right now because it's a more complicated question about how that happens. So there's not really a problem with this being a dual width box, right? Except that it's gonna like be pretty wide, right? So it might be thinking like, hey, I have all the room in the world. Like I can have a lot of text here. And then when it resizes, it's gonna resize to just a measly little square. So whoever's writing this content up here is gonna have to pay attention to that and be like, yeah, you don't actually have, two rectangles to work with. But it's the same thing here anyways, right? With this square. So it's kind of the same problem, right? This content is kind of more rectangular anyways. So yeah, we can resize it effectively, I believe. So from that perspective, it's not, yeah, and let's just say mobile view. Um, and let's delete the nav so that it's clear we're not intending that to be part of it. Okay, so this is our mobile view, and this, the squares are a little bit rough. We can expand this one a little bit. But anyways, from that perspective, it's not that bad. It kind of maintains that everything's a square, just that some squares can be knitted together. Now the problem that we run into with this, and again, be aware we are still in the thought experiment, so we're not committing to anything yet, which is why we're bringing up benefits as well as problems. The problem is that if you can knit together squares, what is the friggin' point? I mean, like, honestly, there's no point to any of this. In some way it makes me feel like that. In some way it makes me feel like, well, okay, like, this thing's all about squares, but if you can knit them together, then you can have some that are dual width, some that are triple width, some that are triple width and centered. Like you just have infinitely more possibilities at that point once you can stitch the squares together. And then it's not like you can only stitch them together horizontally unless you can, and we just want to make that an arbitrary rule, is that like you can, oh yeah, yeah, you can stitch the squares together, but only horizontally. It's like it doesn't make sense, right? Um, uh, but you would, yeah, I mean, unless that's the arbitrary rule, you're going to be able to do it vertically as well. In which case, it just is a crapshoot. I mean, it just gets rid of a lot of the simplicity of what we had so far up here, right? These were all squares. You had to figure out some way to make it work, right? And now we're not going to go about just undoing all of that hard work of making all of these just simply squares, just in order to have some kind of heading section, right? And it just doesn't make sense. Um, so yeah, let's talk about the pros and the cons. Okay, so for pros, we had pros is that like it adapts to uh multiple widths pretty well. So it adapts to like responsive widths, or let's just say to different viewports well. And oh, what was the other thing? There was some other I forget. I'm like so concentrated on the con. Let's just get to the con. Okay, so cons are it opens up a million more options and I hate it. And I hate that. Let's just say I hate that. Because I don't hate it. it's a decent idea. I'm gonna be back in 2 seconds. We just got some dry weather today, so I needed to put a little moisturizer on my hands. Okay, cool. So, yeah, pros is that it adapts to different viewports well, and the cons are it opens up a million more, let's say, layout options. And let's instead of say I hate that, and that goes against the main idea of the framework. Okay, so do we stay attached? Do we stay attached to only squares? I think for now we do. And I want to figure out how to make this work. Um, oh geez. I really want it. I really want the like even if all you could have, like maybe you could only uh maybe you could only have, ones that expand, one, right? Like you can't have ones that you can't have squares that are like four across, right? Because that's just too much. That's too much room. But you can have two across in either direction, like vertical or horizontal. And that's it. That's and that would give us this, and then we could have a centered heading introducing a section. Now, the other thing we could say is like, why the heck do you need this? You really don't need it. Um, uh, you don't need this type of section to make a beautiful landing page. Um, so that's the argument against it is that like we could just have, or we do have, we do have layouts like this. Oh, my baby might be waking up, so I might have to run really soon. Yep, he is looking awake. Maybe not. He's kind of drifting. But yeah, I do have this example, right, where we have this here. And I kind of like this section. Could we just have one where you can have two across, or you can have four across, or no, you can have two across or two down? Okay, I gotta go. My baby's waking up. Okay, thank you guys for stopping by. Anyone who has any questions about Remake or this new CSS framework or anything about web development, let me know in the chat. I'm going to be on tomorrow again, probably around 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Okay, I'll talk to you guys later. Goodbye.